Today, I will be revisiting a topic that I've previously discussed, the British Free Corp. It's a topic that I've been reading about recently, and so for those of you that saw the original video, and hopefully you'll see some improvements and learn something new. John Amry was a British fascist and pro-German collaborator during the Second World War. Born in March 1912, Amry was the son of British MP Leopold Amry, who was a Conservative MP who opposed appeasement of Germany and spoke strongly against British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's perceived lack of leadership during the early years of the war, particularly during the debacle of Norway in 1940. John Amry was a staunch anti-communist, and he was a firm believer that Hitler and Germany had the right idea when it came to battling communism. Amry felt so passionate about stemming the rise of communism that he joined Franco's Spanish force during the Spanish Civil War. When the Spanish Civil War finished, he settled in France with his wife. When the Second World War exploded into life in 1939, Amry remained in France, and he was in the country when Germany invaded in May 1940. He found himself, however, stuck in Vichy France, and despite trying to leave, he was unable. He remained in Vichy France until the summer of 1942, when he was given the chance to head to Berlin to help with the war effort. During this period, Amry suggested to the Germans that they should consider forming an anti-Bolshevik legion made up of British nationals, similar to the French and Spanish volunteer legions, which attracted thousands of anti-communists who wished to fight the Soviets on the Eastern Front. The Germans thought this was a great idea and agreed, and allowed Amry to make a series of pro-German radio broadcasts, calling on his fellow Brits to join the fight against communism and the Soviet Union. And thus the idea that eventually became the British Free Corps was born, and plans were drawn up for its inception. It was conceived that members would be drawn from British prisoner of war camps that were filled with troops who had been captured in the early stages of the war. The Germans believed that, like the French, Dutch and other conquered nations, the POW camps would be full of anti-communist troops who would rather face the Soviets than sit the war out, languishing in prison. This, however, was not the case, and only a handful of men came forward and registered an interest in joining the British Free Corps. The Germans tried a few techniques to get volunteers. They would receive the same pay as their German counterparts equivalent to their rank, and they wouldn't have to swear an oath of allegiance to Hitler. The Germans also moved those interested into a new holiday-style camp to further entice them. On the 1st of January 1944, the British Free Corps was officially established as a military unit, with a total of 54 troops volunteering for service. 54 may seem quite a large number of men, enough for 2 platoons. However, that number was not consistent. The men came and went, and at the highest point, a maximum of 27 men served at one time. The uniform of the British Free Corps was a standard field grey jacket and trousers. The collar was embellished with the 3 lions, and the left arm had a shield with the Union flag inside and a cuff which read British Free Corps. The Germans hoped to send the unit to the front, but they would only do so when its strength grew to 30, enough for a standard-sized platoon. Like I've previously mentioned, this did not happen. So frustrated, the Germans sent the men to the SS Pioneer School in Dresden in October 1944. The Germans found that the men who joined the unit were not interested in training or doing much in terms of soldiering. Most had joined for the pay, increased rations, and simply the chance to get out of the POW camp system, and the thought of fighting on the Eastern Front was not an appealing one. After all, at this point, Germany was losing the war and being pushed back on all fronts, and many of the men of the British Free Corps had issues with discipline and were often drunk, unruly, and absent without leave. In March 1945, the men were arrested and given a choice: you either fight for Germany or be sent to the concentration camp system. Those men that remained in the British Free Corps at the time chose to fight for Germany, and they were reassigned to an SS Panzer Corps on the front line. The unit they joined was made up of a hodgepodge of foreign nationals from other volunteer units, and they saw brief action on the Eastern Front. But at this point, the German military command system was in total chaos, and many of the men simply walked away. Some were captured by the Soviets, who thought they were British POWs caught up in the area, and simply set them free or handed them over to the British. Others tried to escape the West and were captured by the Western Allies. Most were put on trial and found guilty of aiding the enemy, and some were sentenced to jail time, but most of them were simply released. John Amry continued to broadcast and run propaganda for Germany throughout this period of the war, when in late 1944 he travelled to Italy. Here, in Italy, he was captured by partisans and eventually was handed over to Allied forces. Once in Allied hands, he was sent back to the UK for a trial. At the end of his trial, he pled guilty to 8 charges of treason and was sentenced to death by hanging, which was carried out in December 1945. Compared to most foreign volunteer legions of the SS, some of which numbered in the thousands, the British Free Corps can be considered a complete failure that ultimately played the tiniest role in Germany's fight against the communists. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this revised version of my previous video, and hopefully you all learned something new. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe as well, and I'll see you all on the next one.